In a moment, we're going to go through the papers with the barrister and broadcaster Andrew Eborn. We'll talk about all those stories and also whether machismo in your culture makes people unhappier.
Times Radio Early Breakfast.
Good morning, Tom Noonan here with Early Breakfast on Times Radio 5:16. Time to go through the morning's papers, and joining us to do that is the barrister and the broadcaster Andrew Eborn. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning, Tom. Always a delight to join you.
Lovely to hear from you, Andrew. You can get in touch and join Andrew in sharing your thoughts as well. Text us 87222. Start your message with the word Times, or you can WhatsApp us 0333 003 2353. Andrew, let's start with the front page of the Times. War brings in £20 million a day extra in energy taxes. We were just hearing from Daniel Essen while we're talking through the politics. Is that a sign the government should bring in some of the tax changes as the Conservatives want, in your view?
Well, I think it's extraordinary, isn't it? And the Treasury, they say, is going to bring in an extra £8 billion. That's £8 billion a year from VAT on petrol and taxes on these profits of oil and gas firms if the fuel prices rise at their elevated level for 12 months. So it's hitting the motorists yet again whilst they are suffering. I always say that change, which so many politicians talk about, the only change we care about is the change in our pockets. And the reality is making £20 million a day, in additional revenue through these levies and taxes linked to the price of oil and gas is wrong. I had Howard Cox, the founder of Fair Fuel UK, on the Andrew Eborn show discussing all of this. And he, for the last 16 years, he's saved literally billions of pounds for motorists, basically keeping duty down. So Rachel Reeves should look at what other people are doing around the world and turning around and saying, look, the electorate and motorists deserve a better deal. They shouldn't be making this extra revenue off the back of this horrible war. We should be basically making sure that we can keep people moving. And the net result of making sure that people can get in their cars and go to work and go shopping and various other things actually has been proven with various studies conducted by various different organisations to actually have a net result, a significant benefit. So the short answer is this, Tom: we shouldn't be putting more duty on motorists. We should basically be looking to help them in a way, incentivise people to get into their cars and to travel to places so that the economy can benefit from that net result.
I mean, these are sort of questions that I know Stig Abel and Kate McCann were putting to James Murray, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, later on when he's on Times Radio Breakfast about, the increases to fuel duty that the government is planning to bring in. It's been frozen for a number of years. The government is now reversing that cut. Whether that will go ahead over this summer. Speaking to technical operator Andrew, who's running the show for us today, he says that on the way in, prices were £1.51 per litre of petrol and £1.83 for diesel at a petrol station he saw. That's on the way in to London here. On this note, and I suppose keeping people moving, the Civil Servants Union, the PCS, is urging the government to relax rules about working in the office 3 days a week because of the price of petrol. What do you make of that?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I'm not opposed to working from home as long as people are effective. And if you look at sometimes people with a horrendous commute, can be an hour, a couple of hours for some people, in and out, wasted on travel. As long as they can do the job, then I don't have a problem with it. And I think that's the real question, not about the cost of living and therefore we can't afford to get to work. What's happening at the moment, the union wants to relax the rule, which is forcing members basically to commute to work 3 days a week as the Iran war pushes up those fuel prices and inflation. And that's basically the test at the moment. They're sort of saying mandatory in-office working is out of step with financial pressures brought on by the conflict. They say it's pushing up costs for workers who are already struggling to make ends meet. As always, Tom, I think it's the wrong way to focusing on this. What we need to look at is efficiency. Is it necessary for these people to go to the office to carry out their job? If the net result is that they are more efficient by working from home, and it's an appropriate job that you can do from home, then that's fine. And I think we need to look at that rather than it costs too much to get them to work.
I suppose it's also a question of fairness, isn't there, in that can civil servants take advantage of these sorts of perks of working from home whilst others cannot?
Well, I think that's right. And I'd say we should look at all jobs to make sure, is it more efficient? There's certain jobs, obviously, you can't do at home. But you need to work out, can we make companies more efficient? Can we get the net result better? Can we make people happier? And you find there are all sorts of benefits in people going to the office because they interact with colleagues and so on and so forth. But if they can do their job effectively from home, we should look at that across all jobs and work on that sort of basis.
Well, the PCS union would say, yes, civil servants can do their jobs just as well from home as in the office. The head of the PCS union is also on Times Radio Breakfast, so some of those questions will be put to her as well. A few of you getting in touch. Matthew, good morning. Could you tone down the political broadcast? You're talking about what extra the government is bringing in, not talking about how much extra it is going to cost the government. Well, Daniel Esson touched on, again, the inflationary pressures that this war is going to put on the government. It'll be interesting to know how much of that extra £8 billion, which we should say is a projection, if the prices stayed at this level for a year, that is how much the government would bring in. I think we all hope that the fuel prices don't stay that high for that long, but if they do, that's what it would bring in. How much of that would be outweighed by the cost to the government of those added pressures, which of course the government, like all of us, is going to have to pay for higher prices. Phil also gets in touch. Good morning, Phil. If the government were to freeze tax on fuel, the time would come for them to unfreeze it, which would be politically difficult. Thank you, Phil. Yes, and that is the case at the moment. The government has been frozen since the war in Ukraine after the Conservatives brought it down to try to deal with energy prices then. Now the government is trying to unfreeze it, bring it back up. And as it is proving now, it is proving politically difficult. It was proving quite difficult even before this spike in energy prices due to the war in Iran. Events knocking the government off course, as they have wont to do. We'll return to, I'm sure, the war in Iran, the impact on fuel prices. What the government does about it is not going away anytime soon. Andrew, let's talk about some other issues, though. Again, front page of the Times, this warning from Starmer giving doctors 48 hours to call off their strike next week. The government are pretty bullish about this. Should they be? Should they be holding firm?
I think the reality, and what I like to do always, as you know, is to give an alternative view to those that are screaming out from the headlines. And people say that with doctors shouldn't strike and so on and so forth. The reality is this: the doctors' pay is effectively significantly less than it has been for a few years because of inflationary difficulties and so on and so forth. And the strike is not just about pay, but is also about conditions as well. And it's important that we do look after doctors. They are an essential sort of side. I was talking to some young doctors over the last few days about this sort of side and putting the arguments to them. Well, aren't lives put at risk? And they said, well, actually, they're not, because the sort of the services where life is basically could be threatened, those services are not reduced. You're talking about maybe extra waiting time for maybe more minor things and so on and so forth. So we're looking at that. So the British Medical Association, they're staging this 6-day strike from April the 7th to April the 13th, rather than holding them over a barrel, which is what Keir Starmer's doing, saying we're going to take away these posts and so on and so forth. Can they actually look at the issue? Because when you're talking about a 35% increase, obviously everything's relative. If you're talking about, put it into financial terms and say, look, how much are they currently earning? What does that compare with the rest of the world for doctors and so on and so forth? And what is a fair way to deal with it? So I think that's what we need to look at. But it's also, as I emphasise, it's not just about money. It is about those conditions as well. And as you know, I speak around the world about AI and the seismic advantages that can be introduced as a result of artificial intelligence, including efficiencies and ways that we might be able to get waiting times down, ways that you might be able to do the first level, if you like, of assessing patients and so on and so forth, and giving that sort of information. So we need to look at all of those. But as I say, shining more sunlight is the best disinfectant. Let's look at the facts rather than those screaming headlines that we always get.
Like you say, you get a lot of angry opinion on both sides. How much do you think public opinion comes into this? At the start of the junior doctor strikes now, 3-4 years ago, public opinion was more in favour of the strikes. Now, when you do polling, an imperfect tool, as we always say, public opinion seems to have shifted away from junior doctors. Do you think that comes into it, or actually are both sides now too entrenched?
Well, I think the reality, I always say trust comes in on foot and leaves on horseback. And we in the media have a very important role to play as how that public perception is manipulated, which is why I always try and put the alternative view, speak to people from different sides. What are they always trying to achieve? And actually, rather than people just shutting down, saying it's outrageous that people in vocational professions, which could affect life and limb, their ability to strike, and people sort of turn around on that sort of basis. What we need to let's address the actual issue. The actual issue, is it fair what they're currently being paid? If they're talking, rather than just talking about percentages, look at how much in real terms is in their pocket, and then obviously work out where that money can come from. That's the fair way of doing it. But as I say, the conversation should also be about the conditions that doctors work in. I can tell you that doctors, the vast majority of doctors don't do it for the money. They're doing it, it's a vocational profession, it's a very hard profession and so on and so forth. And what they do is fantastic. So we should recognise that. But certainly in the media, we have a responsibility, if you like, to turn down the rhetoric and basically say, look at the facts. How can we find a resolution to this problem? But threatening people, which is what Keir Starmer's doing, is not a good way to do it.
We should say, the government, he would view the threat as towards the union rather than towards the doctors themselves. You do speak to junior doctors, as you say, resident doctors, people about my age, and the lack of choice they get in where they are placed is something that people are unhappy about. The lack of training jobs at the end of your foundation degree is something that they are unhappy about. Whether that is something that an agreement can be reached on without pay remains to be seen, clearly proving difficult at the moment. There are some points of levity in the papers, we should say, away from the angst and the doom and the gloom, Andrew. Page 7 of the Times, the government's Fuel Finder, which is this service it's got to try to help people find cheap prices at forecourts, hard to come by, as we've been discussing. All well and good in theory, yes, except it's currently flagging 116 petrol stations off the shores of the UK, either in the sea or as far off as Togo.
Oh, it's a wonderful, wonderful piece, because if you have a look at it, they show the map, and the map has got lots of these 100 petrol stations show up outside the UK, and dozens of garages in the North Sea, while more than 300 forecourts are listed over 100 miles from their actual location. So this is what's happened. They've done an analysis of 7,553 forecourts. They're listed on the service, and they found that hundreds of these are incorrectly listed as appropriate. The principle is fantastic, but we need to make sure that the information is accurate. So putting them in a river, a sea, or another country is not very, very helpful at all. And a lot of people are sort of looking at that sort of basis. The principle is absolutely great. It's fantastic to work out, look, petrol's a bit cheaper over here, so all rush and get that, and so on and so forth. But about 90% of forecourts are signed up to the scheme, which is great. It became mandatory last month, and under the regulations, fuel retailers must update the government portal within 30 minutes of any change of pump prices. So the bottom line is this: it's fantastic in principle, but the execution needs a bit to be desired.
Yes, some tweaking needs to be done on that, it seems. The Spa Newton Texaco, which is in Penzance in Cornwall, actually being listed near the border between Belgium and Luxembourg.
Glorious.
Station in North Lanarkshire in Scotland is being positioned somewhere in the South Atlantic, not quite working as intended. Danny gets in touch from Hastings. Good morning, Danny. Surely the 2011 45p a mile price set for tax-free work to travel. This is what companies can use for business travel, personal car or van allowance, tax-free, covers fuel, maintenance and so on. 45p a mile, that needs to go up, Danny from Hastings. Again, I suppose, Danny, that would bring down the government's tax revenue, something that it will not be particularly keen on doing, I imagine. Andrew Eborn, the barrister and broadcaster, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on the papers this morning.
It's always a delight, Tom. See you next time.
See you then.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.